I'm never going to be the best poker player in the world. That's just a fact. But can I at least get good enough to gamble my rent payment in an amateur casino and come out ahead? That is exactly what I'm gonna find out with a 24-hour challenge my friend and I came up with. Here are the rules. One of us will take Daniel Negreanu's masterclass and have that be the only thing used for study prep, and the other will do the same thing but with Phil Ivey's masterclass, because who better to learn from than the best? Then, with our rent payments on the line, we'll head to the casino and compete to see who can come out the farthest ahead, or more likely, who will lose less money. So we'll not only be competing against each other, but we'll also get to see which of these two poker gods masterclass can make you the most money. All right, so I just finished Phil Ivey's masterclass and I filled about 4 pages with notes. And if you want to know what's in the masterclass but don't want to spend 3 hours watching it, I have a link in the description to a video recap of the course. But either way, I'll be discussing almost all the things that I learned and how they guided the decisions that I made throughout the actual footage at the table. Let's see how this goes. We sat down at the table around 7:30. I got the camera out and prayed that tonight's session would be a good one. Little did I know, I was about to experience an absolute roller coaster of emotions. The first hand I played was from the big blind with 9-7 offsuit. 4 people limp in and I check. The board flops 10-7-5, giving me middle pair. The small blind checks to me and I raise $10. Everyone folds but the cutoff, who has position on me because I'll be first to act before him. The turn comes a queen, which scares me a bit, so I check. The cutoff also checks and we go to the river. The river comes a king, and at this point, I'm guessing the cutoff by chance has either turned or rivered a pair. So I again check. Luckily, he checks back, I show my 7, and he mucks his hand. I also almost forfeited my hand by not showing both cards and folding my 9, but the dealer and the table were forgiving, and I rake in my chips. The next hand I played was again from the big blind with Jack-7 of diamonds. Everyone folds but the small blind, who limps, and we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes King-Queen-3 and completely misses my hand, but the small blind checks to me. Now, according to Phil Ivey, because I have position on this guy, I'm supposed to bet here to either feel out where I am in the hand or simply take the pot. But I make the mistake of checking back to him and letting him know my hand is probably weak. The turn comes a 9 and the small blind bets $10, after which I make a disappointing fold. Not only am I disappointed because I made a bad play, but the small blind rubs it in even further after turning over his hand and showing, so I take one out of Michael Jordan's book and I took that personal and calmly get ready to take my revenge. The next hand I play is on the button and I'm dealt 8-9 of hearts. Phil Ivey specifically says he likes playing lower suited connectors when in position because it's hard for opponents to put you on a hand post flop, and a lot of times if the board misses for face cards, you'll be ahead if you pair even one card. So we get some limpers in the pot, and when it gets to me, I raise the 10. The small blind to my left calls and my GoPro actually overheats and I lost the footage for what happens next, but I wrote it down so I could walk through the hand anyway. Everyone after the small blind ends up folding except for the cutoff, who I have yet to take revenge on. The flop comes 8-9 jack, giving me bottom 2 pair. The small blind checks and the cutoff raises the 20. This guy had been playing a lot of hands during the night, and a lot of times he wouldn't even have much. So I raise it up to 60 for 2 reasons. 1, I was pretty confident at this exact moment that my hand was the best hand. But 2, if he did by chance have a 7, 10, or queen, then he would either be left with a gut shot or an open-ended straight draw, which I didn't want him to hit. The small blind folds and the cutoff calls. The turn comes a 3, which is a complete blank. The cutoff checks to me, and again, I'm confident I have the best hand, but I don't want him to stay in the hand if he's betting on hitting a straight. So I bet $100, which was the right play because the cutoff folds and I vengefully rake in around a $150 pot. At this point, I'm up about $100 total and I'm feeling pretty good. The next hand I play is again on the button with Jack-5 offsuit, and the under the gun raises it to 5. 6 players call, including me, and we head to the flop, which comes Jack-10-6, giving me top pair. Every single player checks, and I could not be happier as the last to act with top pair. I decided to raise the $10 as a value bet to make it seem like I'm trying to bluff the pot down. Sadly, everyone folds except for the cutoff. The turn comes a queen, which does scare me a little, but the cutoff checks to me, which eases my mind, and I check back to further tell my story that I was just bluffing on the flop. The river comes a 4, so a complete blank, and the cutoff again checks to me. I take a second to think of a good value bet with how far in he is, and make it $20 to call. The cutoff folds, and I take in a pot of about $70, putting me up about $140 for the night. The next hand is when the button comes back to me, and I look down at some beautiful pocket 9s. This guy to my right with the sunglasses had been straddling and raising with nothing all night, and I lost some decent money on 2 hands prior because I didn't have the guts to act on it and raise him back. This time, I was not going to make the same mistake. I raise him up to 30, and everyone folds except him, who calls. Before the flop comes, he gives away some huge information by saying,
"You got pocket aces, huh?"
Which tells me he probably doesn't even have an ace in his hand. The flop comes Ace-8 ace, and he checks it over to me saying,
"Yeah, quads."
and now I know for certain I have the best hand. I think he probably has a face card of some kind in his hand, but I feel at best he paired his 8th. So I try to think of a bet that he would call if that were the case. So I raise 60, and before I can even put my chips in the middle, he folds. As I was raking in this pot, I was remembering what Phil Ivey said. You have to figure out how each person plays as fast as possible and take advantage of that, which I finally did here and was happy about. However, I had no idea my luck was about to take a turn for the worst. The next hand, I again am on the button, and I look down at Jack 4. The same guy with the sunglasses raises to 15, but again, most of the time he's been raising pre-flop and folding on the flop. So I never plan to let him bluff me off a pot again, especially while I'm last to act. I call, but so do 4 others, making it 6 players to the flop with $90 already in the middle. The flop comes Jack 3-2, giving me top pair again. All checks to the sunglasses guy, who raises 50, so I decide I'm going to raise it up to 100, but I again make another rookie mistake with how I raise. I thought by motioning all the chips I planned to raise to the pot like I did here, I would be making it clear I was re-raising and by how much. But the guy to my right must not have watched Phil Ivey's masterclass, because he was certainly not succeeding in making everyone at the table enjoy playing with him, as my honest mistake makes him throw up his hands in a little tantrum and say,
"That was a call."
Yeah.
So I end up just calling his raise of 50, and we go to the turn heads up. The turn is a queen, which again worries me, but sunglasses checks it to me. And I think at this point, I may have realized that he never actually raised post-flop with air, but before I could think, I was quickly distracted by something else.
What is that on the table? I don't want any of my rights or likenesses on the internet at all, so thank you.
Now, I have no problem with anyone wanting their privacy respected, but the way this guy had been acting all night and addressing this situation slightly put me on tilt. So I end up continuation betting another 50, which Sunglasses quickly calls. The river comes a 6, and Sunglasses again checks to me. After a couple of seconds, I realize there's no point in barreling a third time, so I check back, and he turns over pocket aces, meaning all the money I was up at this point had almost completely disappeared. But my bad luck was only just getting started. Every single hand for the next 2.5 hours went something like these next 2 hands. I pick up Queen Nine of Diamonds on the small blind, so completely out of position, but still a decent hand. Sunglasses raises to 15, but again, he's been doing that all night, so I call with the expectation to play heads up and bluff him out of the pot. The big blind calls, but the under the gun +1 quickly shoves all in, and Queen 9 suited is not a hand I'm willing to risk my stack for, so I fold. He ended up having pocket kings, by the way, so I would have been dominated. The other way my hands went looks something like this. Phil Ivey says that he loves playing suited connectors from a good position, and to get to as many flops as possible if you want to learn the most. So many times I look down at 2 small connectors from a great position, in this case 3-4 on the cutoff. I'd like to remind my past self that Phil Ivey said suited connectors, and you'll notice my cards are not suited. Phil Ivey probably would have told me to fold this, but that's what this video is about, making mistakes and learning from them. Sunglasses, or someone I would want to isolate and play heads up with, would raise, and I would try to call with the expectation to raise them off the hand later. We had 4 players to the flop, and it came 2-3-6, giving me middle pair and a gut shot straight draw. Sunglasses raises to 30, the guy to my right calls, and I call. However, the button raises to 120, and everyone to my right folds. At this point in the night, I had about $300 left from my starting $500. So I knew if I called this 120, I'd have to be ready to call an all-in later, and I was not ready to do that with middle pair and a draw. Looking back now, the button might just have had ace-king and sensed we were weak, but I'll never find out because I folded. And I actually agree with Sunglasses here when he says, my luck did slightly turn around a bit toward the end of the night around 10 p.m. when I looked down at 5-7 of diamonds from middle position. I limp in and the small blind raises to 8. Ever since this new guy sat down, he had been playing very aggressively. So I call along with the cutoff. The flop comes 7-4-7, landing me trips. I am absolutely positive at this point I have the best hand, as I do not think the other 2 players would have called a pre-flop raise with a 7 or a 4 in their hand. I check, the cutoff checks, and the small blind raises to 10. I Hollywood here a bit and take my time to make the call, and so does the cutoff. The turn comes at 10, which is irrelevant to my hand. I check, the cutoff checks, and the small blind races to 25. And you can see here I almost snap call, but I pull my chips back to again make it seem like I'm taking my time to think. But I think I gave away a little too much information with how quick I was to reach for my chips. The cutoff folds, and we head to the river, which comes a queen. I check again, hoping that he'll barrel a third time. But sadly, he checks, I show my 7, and he smiles and mucks his cards. I get to rake in a pot of about $100. However, even Even with this hand, my stack was down to about $200 from my original $500. I looked over at Travis's stack and saw he was up about $230 total. And at this point, I just kind of accepted that I was going to be the one to lose money on this challenge. Not only that, but at around 10:30, both of our cameras completely die. So I decide to keep what dignity I have left, and I motion over to Travis to leave at 11, and he compassionately nods in agreement. Little did I know, in the next 30 minutes, I was about to get the luckiest string of back-to-back hands I will ever get in my life. The first all-in I did, as it shows, was 10:48 p.m. Let's watch and count how many hands I can win before 11 p.m. Thankfully, Travis pulls out his phone to record the ending of this hand when he realizes not only is his camera dead, but so is mine. I was dealt King 10 of diamonds, and I call a pre-flop raise of 15. The flop comes Ace 7 Queen, giving me a gut shot straight draw with any jack. My opponent raises first to 25, letting me know that he has something. As I learned from Phil Ivey, although it's not likely I hit my straight at less than 20%, I believe my implied odds if I hit my straight are huge, so I make the call. The turn comes a blank, and my opponent again raises a hefty $80. My luck had been running so badly at this point, I figured I was bound to hit a hand eventually, so I call.
This is not the correct way to think while you're playing poker. The luck that you've had or haven't had is not going to balance itself out throughout the night. But sometimes in poker, the fish comes out ahead because
the river is almost exactly what I wanted to see, which is the Jack of Spades, giving me the Broadway straight. However, the Jack of Spades also completes any backdoor flush draws that were present on the flop. My opponent shoves all in, and he's easily got me covered. I think for a minute, and I finally come to the conclusion that you can hear me say, after thinking about it, I realized there's no way my opponent would have been value betting a backdoor flush draw on the flop, and he probably has something like 2 pair or a set. So I make the call, show my straight, and I happily see my opponent muck his hand. I found out later that he had a set, and that puts me up to around $700 for my stack. The rest of the hands there are no footage for, but I wrote down exactly what happened so I wouldn't forget. So far, I've gotten this guy's number here, as well as this guy's, and both of them had been playing super aggressively. The only numbers I have now to collect are this semi-aggressive player who's won a bunch of hands since he sat down, this guy who you already know has beef with me, and of course, my roommate Travis, who has footage of him winning a hand against me. The very next hand that I play after my first all-in was at 1050. I'm dealt Ace 10 offsuit, and I raise it to 15 as I'm still stacking up and organizing my chips from the last hand. The guy who just went all in with me calls, and this guy right here to my right with the hat raises to $70. I think he believed I was just trying to bully the table now that I won an all-in, and the other guy was tilted, but I make the call, and the same guy to my left shoves the rest of his chips to make it $105 total to call. The guy to my right smiles a little and calls, and I make the call as well. The flop comes Ace 3-4, giving me top pair with a decent kicker. The guy in the hat checks, and I can kind of sense he's nervous a little. At this point, I'm still stacking and organizing my chips from the last all-in win, but I look over and verify out loud to make sure the guy to my left did in fact go all in, and I look at the guy in the hat and calmly say, I'm all in. He just laughs and quickly folds his hand. It turns out he was just trying to bully us out. So there's $315 in the pot now, and it's just me and the same guy I won against last hand. The turn comes a 10, giving me top 2 pair, and the river comes a blank. I turn over my hand showing top 2 pair, and my opponent turns over his hand showing Ace 4, a slightly worse 2 pair. I could not believe how lucky I got twice in a row, and I rake in the rest of his chips, as well as the 105 from the guy to my right, putting my stack now at around $900. At 10:54 p.m., I look down and see I'm dealt Ace Queen, and at this point, I try my best to not shake my head because I cannot believe these pre-flop hands I'm being dealt. I raise it to $15 for the 4th time in a row, and Mr. Happy over here has the same thought process as Mr. Hat the last hand, thinking there's no way that I can have something again. So he raises it to 50. I snap call, and we go heads up to the flop, which comes Ace King 8, giving me again top pair and second highest kicker. Mr. Happy has played some pretty weak hands throughout the night, so I'm pretty comfortable thinking I have the best hand right now. He raises to 50 again, so I Hollywood a bit and take my time and eventually call. The turn comes a 3, he checks to me, and I check back. But now I know my hand is best. The river comes a 9, and I look at his stack, seeing he only has about $70 left. And I pray that he tries to bluff the pot down. And as soon as I finish that thought, he goes all in. I think for about 10 seconds, but as Phil Ivey says, I have to go with my instincts. And I believe after watching this guy all night that I have the best hand. So I call, and it turns out he has pocket 7s. So he shoved all in with 4 overcards to his pair. I show him my ace queen. He stares stares at it for a bit, realizes this is my 4th time winning a showdown, and says, "All right, guys, have a good night." And he slowly gets up and walks away. At this point, I'm up to about $1,100. And I wish I could say it was done at this point, but it's not, because at 10:57 p.m., minutes before we were about to leave, I get dealt Ace King in complete disbelief as I'm stacking up and organizing chips for the 4th time. I raise it to $25, and Travis, out of all people, calls. Ever since Travis has been up about 2:30, he's been playing extremely tight, so I knew that he had something. But it doesn't matter, because the flop comes Ace 10-3, giving me top pair again, and this time top kicker. I check, and Travis makes it 25 to call, which I do. The turn comes a blank. I check, Travis quickly raises it again to 25. This time I take a little bit longer and again pretend to think about my decision, but of course I call. In the river comes a king, this time giving me top 2 pair again. I check, Travis thinks for a bit, and finally checks back. It turns out he had pocket queens, but that's not enough to beat top 2 pair on this board. I rake in another $150 pot, putting me up to about $1,200. Wait, get in here, because I can't scream this. Okay. I cannot believe it. The cameras just stopped it because I literally just had the best run of my fucking life. This is insane. So we cashed in for we cashed in for $500, and right now I'm cashing out for $1,196. So I over doubled my money. If you enjoyed this type of video where I try to get as good at something as possible and then go somewhere to compete and test how good I actually got, then please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.